Greetings, you curiouser and curiouser Herle Burly-ites. I'm looking for the most accurate adjective to sum up the year in Canadian politics. Watershed, pivotal, seismic. They all fit to some extent, but they don't really capture the whole of it, eh? So the pod today is a journalist panel to do a fulsome year in review on all that went down across the country politically in 2025. Joining me are three titans of the Canadian political pen, or pod, as it were: Paul Wells, Tonda MacCharles, and Kathleen Petty. When you're a titan at something and work in media to boot, you're obviously pretty well known. So just as a primer, Paul Wells, formerly at Maclean's, he may mention that, the National Post and the Gazette. He now publishes his own brilliant and widely read newsletter, paulwells.substack.com. Tonda MacCharles is the Ottawa bureau chief and senior reporter for the Toronto Star, spent nearly a decade on CBC's The National and The Fifth Estate. And Kathleen Petty, my old friend, host of the West of Centre podcast, host of Alberta at Noon, former executive producer of CBC News Calgary, and host of The House. So, Kathleen, Tonda, Paul, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks. Great to see you, David.
Yeah, not much really to talk about as we review last year, right? Let's start with the most obvious place to start, which is not actually in year 2025, but in the very end of 2024. So, Kathleen, when Trudeau stepped down, what did you think was going to happen?
Oh, that's a good question, because I sort of felt like anything could happen. The Liberals could flail and be in utter disarray, which I think, would be a reasonable thing to conclude would happen. But Mark Carney was always out there, and there was always the speculation that he might step forward. And I have to say, when he did, his command of that race was kind of locked in pretty quickly. It was actually I felt kind of bad for the other candidates in that race, because Chrystia Freeland, after all, it was just over a year ago that she set everything off, presumably in her mind, thinking that she was setting herself up for victory and for the leadership of that party. And she, along with the others, got absolutely crushed by him. And so the domination was so absolute. And then the change in the polls was nothing short of dramatic. But even in that early going, it was hard to anticipate where it was all going to end up heading. And yet here we are.
Yeah. Tonda, did you think the Conservatives were at risk of actually losing when Trudeau stepped down?
Well, Trudeau stepped down January 6th last year, so right smack at the beginning of the year. And at that point, everything looked completely unpredictable, didn't it? Because they were hanging in. He was hanging in. Don't forget, all through Christmas, there were intense conversations going on, but the reports were still, he's going to try and stay. He's going to try and hang on. So did I expect that the Conservatives would lose? I don't think I knew what to expect. I didn't expect Carney. He makes a lot of hay with the fact that I'm not a politician. Well, he's become a much better politician than I ever actually thought he might turn out to be, because he was really bad at the retail side of it all in the beginning, couldn't lift a speech off a page, still struggles to do that. His French was crap. And I thought he's going to have a tough time. But look, he really did benefit from the perfect storm of political vectors happening at the same time, didn't he? The Trump thing, the inability, who knew that Pierre Poilievre wasn't as adept a politician as we all thought he might be? And his inability to pivot to that moment, I don't think I necessarily saw that coming.
Paul, this past year, starting with Freeland's resignation, has been a violation of one of Paul Wells's fundamental rules of politics, which is that whenever the options are, Canadian politics tends toward the dullest one, right? And I do not think you can say that about the last year.
I always remind people that I wrote those rules in about 45 minutes. I did not expect that we would still be talking about the damn things 20 years later. This is not, despite what some people think, that I did not mean for that shit to be my legacy. But it is also an escape clause, which is for any given set of circumstances Canadian politics tends towards. Well, the set of circumstances is Um, Donald Trump just got reelected after being defeated. He's decided that Canada is his cat's paw, and he's going to play with it. And uh, Trudeau had driven himself 20 points back. I mean, so your first question is, what did I expect? I expected that Trudeau had left it so late, and that the calendar was so compressed that our politics throughout 25 would essentially be chaos. Whoever won or lost this or that, it was just going to be a hellish mess because Trudeau had left too late. I expected that Chrystia Freeland would be at least competitive. And I expected, as Kathleen did, that Carney would be rusty at best. Like when Michael Jordan quit basketball the first time, I think there was a school of thought that said he'd make a hell of a senator for Illinois. And I remember thinking at the time, people don't understand that skills aren't transferable. You can be just fantastic at this, but lousy at that.
As he proved, because he went to play baseball.
Exactly. So and I thought we were about to see Mark Carney play baseball. And I don't think he's the best we ever saw, but it turns out he's kind of good enough. And that Canadians have invested a lot of their hopes in him. And so I think I've just outlined 4 or 5 ways in which I was pretty surprised by what happened over the last.
But wasn't it sort of it was sort of out of central casting, wasn't it really? Because
he's designed by AI for this circumstance, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm getting at, right? Without Trump, is there sort of a viable Carney, and sort of a Carney campaign and leadership for the Liberal Party? I mean,
well, answer that question, Kathleen, because Scott Reed, we once were talking on the Curse of Politics podcast about Poilievre's flaws and what people didn't like about Poilievre and why that wasn't registering back in the days when the Conservatives had their 20-point lead. And Scott said people won't take a close look at Poilievre as long as they have to look around Trudeau to do it. So how much did Trudeau leaving itself just change the circumstance for Poilievre?
Well, here's the problem. I don't think Poilievre thought it changed the circumstance, or at least he didn't campaign like the circumstance had changed, right? He campaigned against Justin Trudeau, and he refused to realize that the job had been recast, and somebody else was now in that leadership position. And so he sounded like he was sort of living in his own universe, a universe where Justin Trudeau hadn't left. And that's who he campaigned against. Sorry, go ahead, Tonda.
No, I was just going to say, but also, just as, you can't underestimate any of that, you also can't underestimate that for the first time in a very, very long time, national federal politics viscerally hit Canadians where they live, right? Like the emotional response that Canadians at every level had to the election of Donald Trump, the tariff war, the 51st state threat. That engaged an interest nationally and action on the Buy Canadian front nationally, and don't travel to the US nationally. And so suddenly what was going on in Ottawa and all the kind of stuff that we drilled down into here was stuff that people were really interested in watching and plugging into, and it's on their social feeds, and you could have an intelligent conversation anywhere in this country in the past year about politics with pretty much any audience. Gen Z, millennials, your grandmother. I mean, people were engaged in a way that they haven't been in a very, very long time. And I think that also affected the dynamic of how we poured over, did Poilievre rise to the occasion, or, is Carney the guy? And yes, he's got the CV, and yeah, he looks like he's out of central casting, but is he going to be able to manage that guy? And I think it was a big, big, powerful year emotionally for everyone. I mean, at the top, when you listed all the adjectives, pivotal, et cetera, you didn't mention exhausting.
Right.
And everybody, it's been exhausting.
The old spinning wheel of doom that used to show up on your computer screen as it slowly buffered its way into doing what you wanted it to do in the first place. I know you Herle Burly-ites remember it. Well, that thing has a name: latency. The time it takes for a command to be processed or the transfer of data to actually happen. Lower latency is always better. And in the super complex computational world of AI, it's critical. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS's Sovereign AI Factory in Rimouski, features extraordinarily low latency, courtesy of the network that powers it, the TELUS Pure Fiber network. The result is the transfer of data between the factory and their customers happens so quickly, it feels instantaneous. Often, the limiting factor for AI computing isn't the nodes, those ultra-powerful computer neurons that handle trillions of calculations per second. It's the connection between the nodes. I mean, what good is the power and majesty of AI if the connective tissue bogs it down? If latency is high and the data can't be processed and shared to the customer? So again, it's down to the network. TELUS's ultra-fast, dedicated fiber routes ensure those large AI data sets and complex computations are transferred securely and processed efficiently across multiple locations. And as I think more about it, it strikes me that the Sovereign AI Factory itself is low latency in structural form. Our businesses, government, and researchers didn't have to wait for a Canadian-owned and operated AI facility to help lead the digital world. TELUS got there very quickly, indeed. So there's a couple of mysteries from the origin of this that I'm hoping that you three can shed some light on for our listeners and viewers, because I don't think they're kind of important, I think, and I don't know that we ever got to the bottom of them. So the first thing is, before Freeland resigned, what were they trying to do?
God.
What was Trudeau trying to do with Freeland? And who was involved in all of that? That led to her resignation. Do we actually know that story now, Paul?
I really don't think we do. I think it was a Hail Mary pass. Went back to read some of the stuff I was writing at the time to remind myself what we were all going through a year ago. And the question came up, why the hell would you tell your finance minister that Mark Carney's going to be your finance minister if he hasn't given you an answer yet? And the only answer I could come up with is, you do that if you've had a horseshoe up your ass your entire life. Like, you do that if you are the beautiful son of a famous man and someone will always come through clutch for you, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like it's like, you know, one of the nerds will give me a ride to the mall, right? Is the way Justin Trudeau would have thought about it in 1980. And in 2024, he's like, the former central bank governor will surely accept my request to be, you know. I've heard now from the Carney side of things that they were trying to find some way to be good team players on the Trudeau team because they thought the Trudeau team would last and they'd have to do that. But they found the Trudeau command center increasingly erratic. Like, he showed up at that caucus meeting in British Columbia as the economic advisor, and Carney thought it would be part of a suite of things that Trudeau would be rolling out to show that he was going to be really getting serious about addressing a new economic time and a new challenge and a coming election. And instead it was, we got Carney, see you next year at next year's caucus retreat. And Carney was baffled by this, you know? Right. So I don't think, and remember, basically since they lost that Toronto by-election in June of last year, Trudeau had been hiding from the Canadian people. He'd been putting out daily advisories saying, no, I got nothing. And then he would show up at a cultural parade in Winnipeg or something. Like, he'd been acting like a guy on the lam who'd been trying to shake the Canadian people as they tried to tail him. So yeah, it was a weird half year before Christian quit cabinet.
I mean,
Tonda, of the three of us, you're the most of the three of you. You're the most gumshoe reporter of the three. The intrepid one out there, sort of banging on doors. Did you ever figure this out?
I mean, I'm the most obsessed with detail behind the scenes, I guess, is the stupid thing about it. But no, honestly, we didn't ever actually get the full sort of blow by blow about how it all came crashing down around them that weekend. If you remember, there was over a period of time just before Freeland was to table the fiscal statement. That weekend was the weekend of negotiations. And apparently on Carney's side, you know, they were saying he was ready to come in, but he understood and to carry forward what Paul is referencing about the summer and the economic advisor, in the sense that the Carney people thought there was going to be a team. There was a sense in the Carney camp that there was going to be kind of a bunch of significant people built around the Canadian campaign to confront Trump and the threat.
Wasn't there talk of Notley is being part of that, for example?
Oh my God, there was talk of, even at one point we heard John Tory was asked, and Jean Charest, and like there was all these names in the ether out there. And at some point, you'll also recall over that weekend, Katie Telford was out of town, and there was, anyway, long story short, I'll tell you, there is an untold story there still.
Instagramming from New York, Tonda, which means she had no idea this was happening.
No, but she had confidence that it was going to happen. That in other words, that Carney was coming in. There were a number of people around Trudeau who were absolutely confident that Carney was in, and felt that somehow they knew that was a deal. And then, it explodes. Now, why did it explode? I mean, and why did Carney not come in? Why did they not make him finance minister in the end? And why did he pull back? And why did Dom LeBlanc end up being finance minister for a day? And, it was kind of very weird. But at the end of the day, look, the Carney people, as near as I could ever get, was he didn't want to, be part of what he felt was a badly handled thing, didn't want to have a knife in his hand, didn't want to backstab anybody, wanted to have the high ground, and wanted to at least say that he was here to fight for the country. And Chrystia Freeland, don't forget, had apparently by then had arguments with Trudeau over, there was going to be a GST holiday on food and toys and all that stuff. Remember that? And when she blew it all up with that letter, called the whole thing gimmicks, and you are not preparing.
$250 check, I think, was going to go out to people.
Yeah, remember that? So
I can tell you from a distance, though, obviously I don't have the inside information. I'm not there talking to people, but I can tell you from my vantage point watching it, part of and you alluded to this, Tonda, is it was all kind of ugly, right? Like not just sort of what ended up happening when she quit. I'm talking about in sort of the weeks and months leading up to that, because the folks around Trudeau or from the PMO were leaking all kinds of things to diminish Chrystia Freeland. She was having a rough time for a long time, and so she was being consistently diminished. And there was something kind of ugly and caddish about the whole thing that I do think that there would have been a general sort of distaste of her ouster and then being replaced. She had been a good soldier. She had held a lot of important portfolios, finance, obviously, but many others, had been a key figure in the negotiation with Trump on the first round, getting us to Kuzma, and, a deputy prime minister. And, she was not being treated with any sort of level of respect or consideration. And I think that is something that Trudeau maybe didn't realize he was beginning to wear. And presumably, to some extent, Carney at least recognized that. I have a hard time believing that would have turned out well if his, dream scenario by him, I'm talking about Trudeau, had worked out, because, what people observed, cynical as Canadians might be about politics, they do believe in human decency. And that absolutely was not on display. And I think to a large extent, Trudeau had to wear that.
It's not like I'm going to say anything new here, but let me say it anyway. This is really important. When you hear people like me talk about the spirit of giving this holiday season, it doesn't just mean giving to relatives and friends who, let's face it, often don't need more stuff. Giving means helping, donating to a food bank or to a charity, helping. For many people, the holiday season is cold and just as difficult as any other time. They need your help. And if you want to make sure 100% of your financial donation goes to those in need, I have a suggestion. The CN Employees and Pensioners Community Fund. You don't have to be affiliated with CN to contribute. Every cent the fund collects goes to help the less fortunate, with a focus on sick children. CN pays all the fund's administrative costs and matches donations to certain activities. Last year, The fund raised $2.13 million. Since its creation, it has raised nearly $20 million. A couple of examples of where the money goes. The Lighthouse Children and Families Organization, a palliative pediatric home that cares for terminally ill children and the psychological health of their families. Or the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, whose work is self-explanatory. I don't know about you, but I cannot think of a worthier cause than helping and caring for sick children. And a pledge on behalf of a family member is a lovely, beautiful gift. It may sound cliche, but giving really is its own reward. The CN Employees and Pensioners Community Fund accepts cash, credit cards, and payroll deductions, and issues full tax receipts. Give, people, give. It will make your holiday all the warmer, knowing you've helped a child fighting diseases that can shatter innocence and families. Now, here's my other mystery from that period of time, which is, here's what I know. What I know is that Trudeau had ignored increasing numbers of his own caucus standing up and saying that he should step down. That Trudeau had ignored poll after poll after poll that showed him tied with the NDP or worse and losing to the Conservatives badly. And that he ignored Chrystia Freeland when she told him he should when she wrote her letter, and he determined right through Christmas that he was going to stay on. And I am told, and people that would come to him, his friends would come to him and say, "We think you should step down." He would cut them out of his circle. They were no longer part of the world. He was determined to stay on, and I'm told that he believed on the day that he stepped down and believes today that he would have beat Poilievre in that election campaign. So these are the things I know. What I don't know is why did he quit then?
Well, I mean, if you remember,
what ultimately forced his hand?
Do you remember the letters, though? There were letters of caucus members signing up to back whatever to get rid of him. And, I think that I don't know that on the day he resigned that he believed he did say something, actually, now that you say it, he did say something to that effect, didn't he, in the January 6th news conference?
Yeah, if I'd known this was on the exam, I would have
right.
looked up the transcript.
But
I'm saying I know from private conversations, the people who know him told me that he believes he would have won the election.
And there's no question he ignored advice from very close people who had nothing other than the party's best interests at heart, that he should step down. That's hubris. That's hubris.
Yeah. But what do you think? Was there some event that we're unaware of that ultimately triggered his decision to resign, given all that was going on?
I'm actually looking at the damn transcript. Anyway, I'll just go from memory. I do believe he thought these fools in the party that he had never loved were buying the bad press and were essentially getting in his way. I did read enough of the transcript to say, my friends, as you know, I'm a fighter. That's why the book I came out with in 2024 was called Justin Trudeau on the Ropes. Because, I mean, I hate that boxing metaphor and the supposed lessons of that boxing match almost as much as Chris Selly does. But I put that as the title of the book because I had been given to understand that he believed it, and that just when you thought you could count him out, he would bounce up off the ropes and he would make short work of whichever chumpin got sent in to fight him, and that it was his working metaphor for his entire life. But David, that doesn't answer your question. Why did it stop being the metaphor? And I believe it's because he was essentially dragged kicking and screaming out of office by the weight of all these. He used to call people who didn't agree with him, who he thought should agree with him, cynics. One of my first conversations with him after he became prime minister was right after Bill Morneau's first budget. And I said, there's no way you can afford that spending with those revenues. You're going to have to increase your GST. And which turned out not to be the case. He would just keep digging a bigger hole. But Trudeau's response was, "Oh, you're one of these cynics," right? So I bet he walked away from the podium on that day and said, the whole party, which he could barely stand in 2013, he was never a liberal. He was a guy who thought the Liberal Party could help, And in the end, I think he thought the Liberal Party was not as clear-eyed as he was about how great he really is.
I mean, I think that's a bit harsh,
Oh yeah.
but that's you're paid to give that opinion, and I'm not allowed to. But I do think that's a bit harsh. But I also think though that if at the end he had nobody telling him he should stay and he could do it. He had people telling him it's your decision, but no, in none of the very I think it was there were probably about 3 people that were talking to him over Christmas that whose advice he trusted at that point, and I don't think any of them were making the case that he should stay. They were making the case it's your call.
Yeah.
And isn't it also true that people who reach that level often don't have the greatest ability for self-reflection anyway? I mean, I think they do sort of live in their own ecosystem that they create for themselves. Is one of the reasons why they get into those jobs and get into those leadership roles. I suspect you could say the same thing about Jean Chrétien as well, in terms of how he saw his leadership.
Well, maybe you could, I wouldn't.
No, but I mean exactly, right? But I guess that's my point. Is that you have to sort of believe in yourself to that extent, even when others don't, and believe in your own sort of inevitability in terms of being, the champion and the winner and the one who can, pull it out when others doubt that you can. And that just seems to me sort of an essential part of what his personality type is as well. So he's got an ego. It's a healthy ego. And he probably, again, a lot of us have trouble with self-reflection. I'm not suggesting, I have my own challenges with it sometimes, but I do think once you sort of get at that level,
Yeah.
it's supersonic.
But Kathleen, I could see how he would think that it's important that he stay on, because they do all talk themselves into that.
Yeah.
They do. Every one of them talks themselves into their own indispensability.
They're
And
saviors.
that's why they all try to stay on as long as they can. But mostly they ultimately have enough objectivity to see death right in the face. So Trudeau, his father, saw it in 84, right? And Mulroney saw it in 93. These are people with healthy egos, but they ultimately saw the facts of the matter, right? And got out of the way of the train.
Well, presumably he did too. It just took him a long time.
All right. Okay. So let's move forward a little bit. We have a new government, and it likes to be called a new government. It likes to call itself a new government, even though many of the staff members, the staff cabinet or caucus are the same. Many of the caucus are the same. Many of the cabinet are the same as the previous government. Nonetheless, just like Stephen Harper in 2006, it is Canada's new government. Kathleen, to your eye, how does it differ from the previous government?
Oh, I think it differs a lot. I mean, certainly from my vantage point, being in Alberta, I think we know that there would have been no energy MOU with Justin Trudeau. So that alone, I think, is a game changer in terms of how this government is viewed. And I know people point to members of the cabinet that remain, that were part of the Trudeau cabinet, but I hasten to remind everyone, and I think everyone knows this instinctively, no one actually cares much about the cabinet, or even knows who's in the cabinet. I challenge people to go out on the street and ask, who the minister of anything is, and see how many people you can get who can answer that question. But they know who the prime minister is. So, and certainly Mark Carney has operated that way as well, right? He wants to be the guy, just like Poilievre wants to be the guy. It's not working so much for him, but it is working, I think, for Mark Carney. And, every Alberta premier I've covered, of course, has, done very well politically, fighting with Ottawa. So, that's always been, just a fact of political life here. And it's usually pretty successful. So it makes it, again, even more remarkable that Daniel Smith was willing to do a reset on a 4th-term Liberal government by virtue of the fact that it was Mark Carney. And that I, have talked to Conservatives locally, to make sure that my impression is their impression, which is she talks to Mark Carney, for good reason, a heck of a lot more than she talks to Pierre Poilievre.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful, Herle Burly-ites, and the fire so delightful. And since we have no place to go, why not cozy up and dig into some tax policy? Well, maybe not exactly how I like to spend my holidays, but tax policy has such a massive impact on our economy. Prime Minister Carney's first budget includes several measures that were steps in the right direction, according to our sponsor, CPA Ontario. The simplification and expansion of the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Credit, and the extension of the Accelerated Investment Incentive included in the Productivity Super Deduction, these are all good. But the chilly truth is that Canada's tax system is still an overly complicated barrier to entrepreneurship, investment, and talent, in the view of CPA Ontario. And as tax practitioners, CPAs see firsthand how this complexity is diverting resources away from more productive economic activity every day. So CPA Ontario has released 20 recommendations to reform Canada's tax system for growth, prosperity, and competitiveness. They say, now is the time to be bold, Canada. A comprehensive review could be the blueprint for a tax system that will heat up our economy. Visit cpaontario.ca/tax reform to learn more. Paul, what do you think about the Carney government compared to the Trudeau government? What stands out for you as differences or similarities, if frankly you see some of those?
I think the big thing is that and it may just be the fact that this is a new government, the way the Trudeau government was new in 2015, 2016. There's much more eagerness to implement, to get stuff done, than there was in the late Trudeau years. I mean, since 22, since I launched my Substack, I would say the Trudeau government thinks the announcement is the policy, and these guys are very clear in their own minds that the announcement is not the policy, and that they actually have to get investment up. They actually have to find trade destinations that aren't the United States. They actually have to hang on to what they can of the American relationship, and they have to reinvigorate the Canadian internal market. The test of Mark Carney will be, can he deliver on even two of those four things? But he knows that that's the test, and so outside potential investors and project champions would go to the Trudeau government and say, let's make something happen, like on your priorities, which are common priorities, on the green transition or something, and they would pretty quickly get shunted off to an associate level public servant who would explain why it can't happen. And similar people go to the Carney government with similar projects or even bigger projects, and they are taken in hand, and they are, the Major Projects Office really hasn't been road tested at its most intense level of engagement, but the simple fact of getting a call returned by something called the Major Projects Office is a novelty. And that's one. The other thing, of course, is ideological. Mark Carney is turning out to be arguably the first progressive conservative prime minister since Brian Mulroney. But there's also sort of your stance with regard to your work. And I do think that the Trudeau government was increasingly all talk. And these guys are not great talkers, and they understand that they're going to be measured by results.
One thing I don't understand about that, I hear this line all the time, that he's a progressive conservative, and conservatives take some delight in saying it. I guess I'm kind of amazed that people say that, given the fiscal record of the Carney government and the spending that he's proposing to do, and the fact that he locked in all of the Trudeau government social spending, didn't propose to cut any of that. Childcare, dental care, existing pharmacare. So it's not, I mean, I know that we don't have a fiscal crisis like Mulroney inherited, but Carney doesn't really seem to be in this to shave the state back to some smaller model.
Well, he's in it to try and shave back the apparatus in Ottawa, if you will. But no, he's trying to goose, if anything, action out of the existing apparatus and standing up what looks like more private sector funding and financing agencies, doesn't he? be it from defense or major projects. But look, I just want to circle back to like Paul's point about, the way they work and the pace at which they work. Maybe we saw early signals of that when Trudeau, do you remember in the first few years of Trudeau's mandate after 2015, they were so slow in getting appointments out the door and getting things done that way. And then the pandemic hit and suddenly everything was on bust and things were happening fast. And then, latterly, things slowed down to a crawl again. And absolutely, Carney's brought a different style of, kind of like a City of London banker style, the black shoes sort of myth around town that everybody has to wear black shoes and show up on time and never be late for a meeting and, know your brief or you're going to get yelled at, and he's an equal opportunist yeller. That's one thing. But, if you're looking at how different is he from Trudeau, so different. There's no way on God's green earth Trudeau would have cranked up defense spending to never mind 2%, 5%, never mind 2%, right? Like it just wouldn't have happened. And yes, it's a response to Trump. The dismantling of the climate regulatory action plan is something to behold. And going all in on the MOU and the tax credits and trying to get industrial carbon pricing as being the anchor, and methane regs, I guess, as the anchor of your climate policy. That is it's hard to even you can't overstate what a change that is. That's a massive change from the Trudeau government. And the other thing that strikes me is it's not just, on those levels. Look at what we're doing now. And again, it's a response to Trump, but Trudeau had to deal with Trump as well for several months into this whole year, till March, end of March. Don't forget, Trudeau was the one who slapped on counter tariffs originally on the US. But it's Carney who's undertaking a complete thaw in our relations with China, a country that actually earlier this year executed 4 Canadians on drug charges. Like, let's not forget that either. So we're now going all in on China. We're going all in on India. And, the story of India's government and its relationship to the assassination of Canadians on Canadian soil is not a story we know the full details of yet, but we are all in on that. So those are sea changes from the Trudeau government. So it's not just a stylistic thing, it's very much a substantive thing as well.
One person's pragmatism is another person's lack of principle, right? So, Paul, a little bit more personally, as somebody who's trying to have a dialogue, as all three of you are, with the government on a daily basis and learn what it's doing and write about it, report about it, ask questions, get questions answered, what's it like now compared to what it was like?
It's similarly terrible. David, that question is triggering for me because I'm an old guy with a Substack now, and I used to be Maclean's magazine, right? So when I don't get a call from the PMO, I start to think, well, fuck me, I'm a has-been, but it's actually better now than it was in August. Like they have doubled or tripled up their staffing in the PMO press shop. I think I'm not the only one who's getting a little bit more responsiveness from the official channels. And being liberals, there are all kinds of unofficial channels, They're a little bit more confident in giving an off-the-cuff answer right away. Whereas the Trudeau gang had fallen way down the rabbit hole of saying, I have to give you a perfect answer, and I hope you can wait until next month for it. Which is, I've had this conversation with people in communications. That's insanity. It not only wrecks my job, it blows up your chances of making your case in any kind of timely and responsive way. This new crew is a little bit more old-fashioned on that front. But it still is very much an archipelago of Mark Carney scrums. I don't know a damn thing on Tuesday. Nobody I ask knows a damn thing. Carney scrums on Wednesday, and everyone has their marching orders until the next Carney scrum.
Right.
And I don't think they can fix that because that's him.
The Port of Vancouver is used to shifting conditions, and this moment is a shift like no other. Trade rules are being rewritten. We need to adapt to move more of what Canadians make, grow, harvest, and mine to more customers around the world. And the biggest opportunity for Canadian businesses? Selling more to Indo-Pacific markets, a region that'll make up half the globe's GDP by 2040. That's billions of customers in Japan, South Korea, China, who want what Canadians make to feed families, build cities, and power economies. The good news? The Port of Vancouver is uniquely poised to step up. Why? Diversification and First Nations partnerships have long been its strength, and its growth plans are designed to meet this moment. And with one-of-a-kind projects like Roberts Bank Terminal 2, set to build new industrial land, unlock $100 billion of container trade capacity annually, and create tens of thousands of construction, longshore logistics, and other jobs, it's ready. Because it's not just about moving goods. It's about moving Canada forward, to deliver the true north far and wide. To learn how the Port Authority and its partners are working to deliver for Canada, visit portvancouver.com/delivering for Canada. Do you remember, Kathleen, early on in the leadership campaign, there was a moment of an exchange between Carney and Rosemary Barton,
Yes,
where
look into yourself.
where he told her to look inside herself because she was starting from a position of animus, right? In her question. And I only hearken back to that because there have been little attitudinal things on panels or in different exchanges, and then the reference about feminist foreign policy.
Yeah.
I am hearing rumblings from liberal women.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a liberal woman, so I haven't rumbled, but I've certainly observed. But, you know, he does this, like, he's sort of dismissive of people, all people, right? I mean, I was watching him today, as a matter of fact, at that news conference with Doug Ford, and Doug Ford started saying that was the greatest ad of all time, his Ronald Reagan ad. And Carney couldn't help himself. He rolled his eyes into his head. And then the reporter said, you know, I don't know if you saw what Mark Carney just did, but, and then carried on. And then after that, you know, it's like he didn't even realize he was doing it. And then, you know, Carney was grinning from ear to ear. So, I mean, I see him more like, I find him in news conferences, in scrums. He has a very clipped, dismissive tone about him. And, you know, point one, point two, point three. And then, you know, sometimes when people do a follow-up to get some clarification, you know, he'll say, I already answered that. Or, you know, that was point two. Like he does have this, I don't know, this way of communicating sometimes, and then you can see him checking himself, trying to become more charming about things, I guess, and try and flash a smile. But, you know, I see that, and then I imagine what he must be like off camera. And there is something very sort of, he feels abrupt at times. And, you know, on one hand, he answers questions, but on the other hand, if you press him, because you realize that the answer actually is not that clarifying, he gets a bit short with people. And yes, he does do that to women, and I think maybe we notice it more with women, probably. I just think there's a general sensitivity around that. But I would argue he does it with everyone.
I was at
thoughts
that.
about that?
Well, I was on that trip with Rosie just before Rosie asked the question, and she was actually not at the mic. It was another journalist, another female journalist, Steph Levitz from the Globe, who just asked him about Brookfield assets and potential conflicts. And he hated that question throughout the campaign. He hated it when he won and became prime minister. He hated it just before the election, all throughout. He hates it because it challenges his integrity, and he feels he's answered it. And if there's no evidence, why use innuendo? So it gets his back up every time. And in that particular scrum, when he gave kind of a clipped answer to Steph's question, Rosie from the side said, you know, well, do you think you'll have no conflicts as prime? Like, it's hard to believe that. And that's when he said the look inside yourself, Rosie line. And, you know, they actually have had, you know, it's not like he didn't know Rosemary. Maybe he thought he could be kind of, you know, somewhat flippant and not get and that would carry, but that doesn't carry in a formal scrum situation. No matter what, if you have a off-camera personal or other relationship in any way with any journalist, you can't get away with stuff like that in front of a camera. He does seem to bristle when challenged by female journalists, I'll say. But what if you actually look at what's bugging him, and in those situations, the kinds of questions he's answering flippantly, it's often a political question that he either feels like he's answered or he doesn't think it's worth answering. And why don't you ask me a substantive policy question? If you ask him a substantive policy question, he engages. He tries to engage on the substance of something. But for example, when he was in South Africa at the G20 in the closing news conference, when he never tells us when he talks to Donald Trump. Well, guess what? It kind of matters. And so he had been asked, his staff had been asked, when's the last time? Oh, well, I don't know. And the only time we know sometimes there's no readout is if we ask him in a scrum. So that's what Ashley Burke was doing, asking him in the scrum in South Africa, when did you last talk to Trump? Since trade talks have been cut off. And he deliberately did not answer that part of the question, tried to move on. And she came back and she said, well, what about the question about Trump? And he said, well, who cares? It's a detail. Again, you can't get away with that. It's kind of a big deal to the rest of the country. We do care. We'd like an answer, sir. But, you're hearing rumblings from Liberal women. I think you heard a big sort of a low-grade rumble from the Liberal Women's Caucus when there was when it appeared he was going to slash funding for the women and gender equality programs to the extent that he was cutting funding for everything. And they made a loud pitch in caucus and got the funding restored to a certain level, a higher level than other programs. So yeah, you are hearing rumblings. Yes, it's a red flag for them. I've had conversations with his staff. What's his problem with women? What's the problem with answering female journalists like that? They dispute he has any such of an issue. They say he has been short with male journalists as well. I don't know, Paul, if you've had that experience, but I've certainly been on the receiving end of a bark from him. And I don't know if men get it in equal fashion.
I mean, I'm told he does. I'm told he dragged a senior finance official over the coals in ways that were that he heard later were unseemly. And senior financial official was a guy. Two caveats. I think on the policy, it's actually something he should really be careful about. Like women and gender equality, everyone thinks that's the rainbow of different genders and ho, 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 it's woke stuff. First of all, that woke stuff matters to the people it matters to. Secondly, most of that funding is to rape crisis centers, trying to help women whose lives are in danger of being utterly shattered in real communities across the country. And he needed to be told that, and he should not have been needed to be told that.
100%.
On the dynamics of scrums and stuff like that, I would say about Carney, as I have said all along about Poilievre, he often wins when he yells at a journalist. There's very few people in the country who think that we have a monopoly on virtue, and especially the partisan of whoever's at the mic will think we're the enemy. Conservatives are very defensive about Poilievre because of the liberal media. And liberals are very defensive about Carney because of the corporate-owned, American-owned National Post and all of their buddies. Like they think we're all working for the National Post, and incidentally, they're wrong about the National Post. But that's another fight.
Man, that's an old reflex for you to have.
Well, yeah, but still. Well, and especially because when I was working for the National Post, it was owned by a kind of a Canadian. But
at least kind of. Yeah. Is it just my impression, or is this government run by, and this actually flows from this conversation because most of the people you would be able to identify in his operation are men, but is this government run, Paul, by an unusually small number of people?
Yes, which is, Carney sometimes goes back to, in the middle of an otherwise calm and routine interview, interjecting and saying, we're in a crisis. Like, this is a crisis thing. He really... I haven't investigated this, but there's a general sense that there's a very similar alternative reality to this reality in which he never threw his hat in the ring for prime minister. He flirted with it for longer than a decade, but he wasn't burning to be prime minister. And I think he decided to do this because the old thing about the Chinese symbol that is trouble and opportunity, like a crisis offers trouble and opportunity. He thought he could become prime minister, and he thought it was worth doing. He's the leader of a tiny commando that is on a mission to keep the ship from steering into the rocks. He's not a deliverer of routine, and he's actually disdainful of routine. I mean, the latest example is this public sector productivity thing that was ordered up by Anita Anand only a year ago. And it said, the task force came back and said, you should really worry about public sector productivity. And they were told essentially in these words, no, we actually don't care about that because our attention is elsewhere. He is, I don't think he may wind up still being prime minister in a large number of years, but I don't think he intends to. And I think he wants to walk away, leaving most of Canada's messes still messes, but having fixed a couple of them. It's like you call in a plumber to fix the plumbing, and you don't expect them to repaint the walls. I think that's his conception of his job as prime minister.
I thought it was interesting. He said something this week in one of the French language interviews, the year-enders he did. He was asked about, did you just want to really just get one mandate, one and done and out? And, will you stick around? And he said, well, I don't know. I mean, he said, to be honest, he said, I really don't know. But I won't be sticking around for a decade, he said. That would be ridiculous.
Okay.
And he also said that he's not going to trigger an election if he doesn't kind of eke out some kind of a majority anytime soon. I thought that was also interesting. I think that to your question about, it's being run by a small group, I think that is true. There is a triumvirate in the PMO. It's Marc-André Blanchard, the chief of staff. It's Michael Sabia, the head of the Privy Council, and it's Carney. And then there are sort of substratas of very key advisors close to him, whom he trusts. But the big meetings and the top level cabinet ministers who are on the front lines of all of those files, they only want to talk to those three people. Jerry Butts used to have a saying, I guess, about any meeting that's more than two people is not a meeting worth being in. Well, right now it's a meeting of three, right? That's the meeting everybody wants to be in on. And yeah, will he stick around for longer? We'll see. But he's looking like he's really actually into it right now, doesn't he? Don't you find that when you see him at any news conference?
Looks pretty motivated.
Yeah, and Paul's right. It's him. He's the guy. He's the one in charge. Nobody else really has free speech.
Sounds a lot more enthusiastic about his job than Pierre Trudeau does in the Coots Diaries.
I know, and I'm going to read that because I watched that Herle Burly, and that book is on its way. I'm absolutely reading that. But you know what I'm going to be interested in seeing is who he brings in. Right, we keep hearing about these appointments that are going to happen. Bill Blair gone and Wilkinson gone and so forth, and who he brings in as candidates. But because you reference sort of the high level cabinet ministers like Tim Hodgson, obviously they are very close, and his counsel is valued by Mark Carney. So he's sort of in that rarefied group. But I'm going to be super curious to see who else he's thinking of recruiting to run in, what the inevitable by-elections are going to be. Never mind.
There are no names circulating, Kathleen. There are no names circulating for those by-elections. I haven't heard of a single speculation about who Carney wants to replace Chrystia Freeland, for example, in University Rosedale. But Hodgson is an interesting guy in the sense that he clearly is in that. I mean, Paul mentioned Sabia and Marc-André Blanchard, and that's clearly true. But if there's a minister in that decision-making group, it would be Hodgson. He seems to me to be the most senior minister in the government by now.
I think Dominic LeBlanc. Don't underestimate. Carney relies on Dominic LeBlanc.
Good call.
Five ministerial titles. And Dominic LeBlanc has the political savvy that none of those other four people have. And it's very telling that he's kept him as the lead on the file for the Canada-US piece.
Tonda, do you think that Carney Because it's difficult for those of us who are political liberals to look into the PMO and see who's doing the politics in this government. And so,
What, you don't think Tom Pitfield's doing the politics?
I don't know what Tom Pitfield is doing. But what I would say is that it's possible, it seems to me, that highly unusually for this era, going back maybe to the 50s or something, is he getting his political advice from his cabinet? Steve McKinnon, Dominic LeBlanc, are these the people that are the most important political advisors in the government?
I'd say Steve McKinnon, Dom LeBlanc, Melanie Joly when it comes to Quebec, and less so Champagne in that regard. But look, Braden Cayley spent a good chunk of time at the party and was good on operations and in the field. And he and Tom Pitfield have been, quite closely associated with the efforts to get floor crossers. And, they were the ones who were on the plane and whispering in Carney's ear through the politics of the federal campaign. And so I wouldn't underestimate them in terms of that's at least on paper part of their job, big parts of their job. But, who does Carney listen to? It's a really tough PMO to penetrate right now. Don't know if, Paul, you find the same thing, or you, Kathy, but I find that it's a tough crew to penetrate, to get to understand sort of what guides their thinking. And it's wait for the next Carney scrum.
So I'm glad that Tonda and David, you added Steve McKinnon to the list, because I would have increasingly it seems to me that McKinnon's the tactician, and it's, to my mind, long overdue. He played a big role in the Martin constellation and then was ignored for most of the Trudeau decade. Turns out he knows a thing or two about politics, and we're seeing that. I wouldn't discard the possibility that a lot of the politics is coming from Mark Carney. Lord knows there's nobody who does politics for a living who would have said, try and get a memorandum of understanding with the Conservative Premier of Alberta about oil exports. There's no one who would have said, that's a winner.
Right.
And it's in the early stages of provoking a complete realignment in our politics.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
But we don't even know if it is a winner. Like, let's be clear. It's, the point that I've made more than once is, as complicated and as difficult as it may have been to negotiate that MOU, that's the easy part of that. The hard part is still to come. And that's what we're going to see unfold in the new year.
I've been comparing it to Meech Lake. I'll tell you when it's over whether it was a good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it also, as Lowell Murray described Meech Lake, a seamless web?
Well, that's the big question. Is it a take it or leave it package? Will Alberta do any of the other things in there that, unless there's a pipeline?
Admit it, Paul, you're impressed by that.
Oh, God, yeah. And I have to remind people, my spouse, Lisa Sampson, is a lobbyist for the Pathways family or snack bar, whatever the hell it's called. But neither of us tells the other one what to think or do.
No, I meant you were impressed by the fact that I remembered Seamless Web.
That's what I thought.
I'm impressed by Seamless Web. I'm also impressed by someone who takes a huge risk on a big policy change. Like, we're almost out of the habit of trying to convince people of things they didn't already believe in this country. I mean, Pierre Poilievre, and he's not the only one, I think Justin Trudeau was the same. Their entire game was find the people who already agree with you and flatter them. And so we were out of the business of having debates, and now this is a very high stakes and slightly dicey, well, more than slightly dicey gamble,
Can you reconstruct the center in Canadian politics?
Well,
right?
I think Carney's political skills in all of that are also still to be tested through whether that gets realized, and is it, because we are told that a factor in his thinking to resolve the tensions with Alberta was the rise of a separatist movement out there, and is at the somewhat it's been put to me that while so little attention was being paid to Quebec and what's going on in Quebec, now they've still got, I guess, the run up to the Quebec election in October to kind of get a handle on what's going on there, but I think Carney's political skills are going to be tested in that respect as well this year. You know, the national unity issues around the pipeline are not just around Alberta, provincial, federal issues. The Indigenous piece is still a huge test for them. So,
But it's
Kathleen,
not.
on the MOU, a lot of the doubt that progressives have about the MOU relates to the content, but also a lot of the doubt relates to, is Premier Smith a good faith actor in this? Do you believe that she is?
Yeah, I think yes. But let's be honest, memorandums of understanding are about your understanding of the memorandum. Okay. So, people can, come to the table with different interpretations of what was agreed to. And that's why I say I think, negotiating an MOU and signing it is the easy part. The reality of that MOU and how it gets sort of pursued and comes to life is something else again. And I would also say, I know that Carney has indicated that he was worried about the separatist here as part of his motivation for signing it. But I think it would be incorrect to say he's also not alive to the fact that oil is our most valuable export. And he does think about money, and obviously he thinks about trade. And I think he sees, notwithstanding what Trump says, that oil can be worth a lot in a trade negotiation, and he sees the potential for that too. I'm not, obviously they're talking about the Pacific, right, and sending some of this to Asia, but they also were talking about Keystone. So
bingo.
I think he sees oil as a great big piece of leverage that he can bring to the table. And so he's recognizing that as well. And the other thing I would say about separatism here is the hardcore separatists, just to be clear, they don't want Polyev either. So, let's not, think that, if it was Polyev, everything would be okay. The hardcore separatists, their point is it doesn't matter who's prime minister. They owe their job to Ontario and Quebec, and that doesn't work for Alberta, right? That's their starting point. And then there are sort of the persuadable separatists, right? Who might be in and might be out. And it's that group, I think, that they're looking at and thinking about when they worry about sort of what they perceive as a potential separatist threat. But there's no polling that suggests that it's a serious threat.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears for just a few minutes before we have to wrap up, unfortunately. And that is to say that all three of you, and I'm going to date you when I say this. So, coal in the Christmas stocking for me. But all of you have been watching Pierre Poilievre for at least 21 years in elected office, right? What did you learn about him this year that you didn't know, Tonda?
I'm just going to, that's a tough one. I think I have to circle back to, I thought he was a more agile political athlete, to use your cursive politics line, trademark line, because it's a good line. I thought he was more versatile and agile and nimble than he has turned out to be. So in that respect, I learned something. I thought that he would adapt. He's been so adept. He's been such a good, effective communicator to grow his own base to if anyone had said the Conservatives were going to get 40 or 41% of the popular vote and not form government, like we'd all have been surprised, right?
Right.
But it's that thing where he has built up such a reputation of being such a skilled politician over those years, because that's all he ever did. And then you see him perform badly up against Carney, badly in a federal election. You see him lose his own seat. His people not be able to see that until it was far too late. And then, as he gets his Alberta riding and back in the House, I still don't see I guess, a nimbleness in him. And I think I thought, and that surprises me. I spoke to him last week at the U.S. Embassy Christmas event, and
Shame on both of you for being there, by the way.
I know, and he struck me as, like I said, thank you for coming to the press gallery dinner. Please come more often. It was fantastic to see you there. It's one of the nonpartisan events in the calendar in Ottawa that everybody, lots of people do love. It's torture for an on-the-record speech for a politician. I get it. But he pulled it off in large measure, had a couple of really good lines. And I said, how'd it go over with your own crowd? Like, what kind of reaction did you get? And he said, the right-wing influencers didn't give me, they liked it. And I said, they liked it? And he said, yeah, they loved that I came and talked to the media and, insulted all of you.
And owned the libs. Yeah.
I'm just like, there are small changes, but it's not, I just thought he was going to be a bit more nimble.
Paul?
Well, the first thing I was going to say is almost exactly what Tonda said. I was going to say he doesn't corner well. I honestly believed he would have more resources, and would for a guy who had a very canny read of what Trudeau was doing wrong, both substantively, because the economy's been going badly for far too many Canadians, and also in terms of the framing. I thought that in a new circumstance, he'd have a new approach, But since Tonda said that first, I'll say another thing. I think he's trapped inside his phone. I think he's a pure product of the social media era in our politics. He became an important player in the Harper caucus about the time that the iPhone and YouTube and Facebook came up. And I'm not sure he can escape with this result. Say I was say he's the prime minister and I'm a provincial premier or a state governor or a billionaire or an indigenous leader, and we have a meeting. I really think nothing that gets said between us in that meeting would be as important to Prime Minister Poilievre as what he could say about it later into his phone to rizz up his folks, I honestly don't think he sees the distinction between transacting the business of the government and having a show. And I feel that as a keen disappointment that I feel about someone I thought I knew better.
Kathleen?
Well, I thought he was going to be or was a better tactician and a better strategist. And I'm not seeing any evidence of that. I mean, in terms of strategy, his inability to forge good relationships with conservative premiers who would be able to help him, right? Where he doesn't sort of have to go it alone, I find really surprising. And then even with Danielle Smith, although she's been very careful in how she's responded to that motion on the MOU, tactically, I think from most observers, that failed. It didn't achieve what he wanted it to achieve, and actually hurt him in a way because he caused problems for Danielle Smith. Because he has, leading up to that motion, essentially talked about that MOU as if it's not worth the paper it's written on. Well, what are you saying to the Conservative Premier of Alberta? You're saying that she signed something that was a piece of crap, right? Like you're essentially calling her a fool when you say that, right? That it's a worthless MOU. Now, he might try and sort of couch that by, well, I don't believe they're really going to follow through, and I know that's what he said, but his initial response was to just denounce it entirely. An MOU that she signed, with a smile a mile wide, with Carney's smile, competing for size and scope. And I did notice that when he was being interviewed by Rosemary Barton, he was pumping Smith's tires like I've never heard, right? So it just sort of felt like he was trying to repair that bridge.
Right.
And she's not going to say anything publicly, but that is not helpful to her. And so, yeah, I think as a tactician and a strategist, I just thought he was more skillful than what I've observed, and based on the assessment of many people who have been watching him for years.
So I just want to put this to you people and see what you think about this, because I think this is a perfect example of a phenomenon. Carney versus Polyev is a perfect example of a phenomenon that is easily worthy of a PhD thesis, if not more, if not a book in the old days in Canada, which is how the two parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals, arrive at their leaders. So every Conservative leader for decades now has been a product of the organization of the party. They've been the president of their campus club. They've been involved. They've worked their way up through the party. And then they get to a point where they're considered to be leader. Andrew Scheer, Pierre Poilievre. This is how, even Stephen Harper, this is how it happens. In the Liberal Party, if you want to be the leader of the Liberal Party, the last thing you should ever do is be involved in the Liberal Party, because it never chooses anybody who's worked their way up through the ranks of the Liberal Party. It's always elephant hunting. It's always looking for who's the great thing that will be great for Canada. We'll just put that on top of our party and we'll be happy with it, right? This results in very different types of people leading these two parties, and we're seeing it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an
It makes our job interesting. I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, that's
going back to Paul saying, look for the most boring result. I don't do that in this province. There's
I don't
nothing
think
boring about what's happening here.
it was
I mean,
known that
arguably-
it was known that Mark Carney was interested in politics before it was known that Mark Carney was a Liberal. And I never detected any interest in the Conservative Party in him. Any.
Is he a Liberal, though? Is he?
Well, yeah, if you email the head of the Liberal Party, he gets the email. I mean,
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? You know what my point is?
Well, I think that Liberals have different points of view on that, Kathleen, to be honest. I think people like myself think he very much is, and thought that Trudeau was too left, especially when he did the deal with the NDP. There's obviously other people that were attracted to the Trudeau proposition that find that he's too right-wing. But this is a tension that's existed in the Liberal Party back and forth for a long time, as you know.
I mean, arguably, though, David, Chrétien came up through the party. Paul Martin was an MP at, long before and then minister long before. I mean, they both had strong and long roots in the party. No?
Well, Chrétien was an MP for his whole life.
Yeah.
So there's that, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like he was an organizer. It's not like he was a strategist. It's not like he used to run campaigns or he was the president of the party in Quebec or anything like that, right? And Paul Martin came into politics with stature because he had the private sector career. Right?
He came in 88 with an eye towards the leadership in 1990. Like that was a real short runway. He recovered well when it didn't work out, like in some ways spectacularly, but the game was like the next down,
Yeah, but I mean, he never. Yeah.
The question for me is whether people who are political organizers like me actually think too much in an organizational, strategic, tactical way, and not enough in a big picture way. Like, I think it's a flaw. Like, I don't think I should actually be a leader because it's all strategy with me. Right?
To your question about whether he's a Liberal, or Kathleen's question about whether Carney's a Liberal, or is he something else, assuming is the question, is he a Conservative? I think that, it's pretty clear that, he said his belief is that the markets will not solve everything, and that you cannot redistribute wealth you don't have, and therefore the idea is to generate wealth and to leverage the markets so that you can do the other things. And I don't think that you necessarily get that kind of a philosophy from Pierre Poilievre. I do think that Carney, for all the stuff he's dialing back, I think I still take him at his word that he believes in climate action and wants to tackle and meet targets, if not these ones, the ones that are coming up quickly in 2030 and 35. He very much does want to reduce emissions. It is very hard to get a straight answer out of Pierre Poilievre about would he respect the targets to reduce emissions. So Look, he's not he's not the liberal that we've known for the last decade, and but Pierre Poilievre is not the conservative we knew for the previous 20 decades either, was he? So, two very different creatures, I think.
Yeah. So listen, I have to let you go. And this was so interesting. Can I ask you to make a prediction? Just one little prediction before we go. Is there an election in 2026? A federal election in 2026? Paul?
No. I think the Liberals will have their majority. I don't know how long it'll last, but I think it'll last for most of 26. And even if they remain in the minority, nobody wants an election except for Poilievre in 26. The Bloc, all the action in Quebec is in the Quebec provincial election and the likely start of a referendum campaign soon after.
Yeah.
So I think we are pretty safe for the next year.
Okay. Tonda?
If you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have said quite possibly. But now I think they are within a whisker and will get another floor crosser or two. And so I think that stabilizes the election calendar federally for another year at least. If they do get a majority, by the way, with one or two more people, it's a majority. It makes life easier for them in Parliament. They get control of committees. They can push things through. They can, jam closure down on debates and make things happen. But that's going to be also not a strong, stable majority, right? That's going to be a majority wherein you could argue that Carney will be more beholden to the left flank in his caucus than he is right now.
Will be interesting to watch that for sure.
No, I'm going with the same thing. No
election. Kathleen, this is the question. Is there an election in 2026?
I thought there was going to be one in the spring, honestly. He needs more than a skinny majority, though. Like another floor crosser or two. I'm not sure that's going to be enough. And I've long said that I think it's the next budget is the one to watch, not the one we got this year, the one we get next year. I think it's going to be bigger and in many cases more monumental and more determinative about what happens to this Liberal government. So I think I would lean into the election next year, but not until the fall.
These damn fall budgets are going to be constantly having us into Christmas election speculation.
I know.
Shag that, I say.
Terrible. So I respect the three of you so much. And thank you, all three of you, for the work that you do in informing the country and giving us the tools and the basis to make smart decisions. You all three are tremendous at your jobs. I could not be more grateful that you've given your time on the eve of Christmas just to talk with us this way. Paul, I want to thank you personally for having me on your variety show a couple of weeks ago. That was great fun. Kathleen is a constant promoter of our work at Air Quotes Media on social media, so thank you.
I'm a huge fan.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and Tonda lives on my lake, so there you go. All three of us, we got something in common. Thanks all. Have a great holiday. Merry Christmas to all.
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Herle